Welcome to Monday Night Live, the YouTube show all about Notre Dame football from the staff at Inside ND Sports and the Rivals Network that'll make you want to storm the field or at least storm your living room. I'm Eric Hansen. He's Tyler James. Our recruiting writer, Kyle Kelly, is chasing down reactions from the big recruiting weekend from the epic upset of number 4 Clemson. Tonight, Tyler and I will break down that Irish victory and spin it forward to what it means in the context of the rest of the season. We'll also take your questions, and that segment is coming soon. So start filling up the question portal.
All right. And also make sure you hit the thumbs up to like this video and also subscribe if you aren't already. That helps us get in front of more viewers. And also go ahead and comment what your favorite moment from the Clemson game was. I'm interested to hear what people enjoyed the most from that game. But before we get to your questions, we want to get to Eric, who told me he's feeling a little extra giving today. So we're going to have 6 headlines from Marcus Freeman's press conference earlier Monday. Although the 6 might not be from Marcus Freeman, but the 6 will be from Eric himself. But Eric, go ahead. What was your first headline from Marcus Freeman's press conference earlier Monday?
What's the next step for Drew Pyne? And it was interesting today because I asked Marcus that question in the press conference, and it reminded him to announce the players of the game. And I think it'll surprise some people that he identified Drew Pyne as the offensive player of the game. Now, Drew was right at 50% passing. That's the 4th week in a row. He has not broken 50%. He was under 10 completions for the 2nd week in a row. The 85 yards passing in that game was Notre Dame's fewest since Deshaun Kaiser threw for 54 yards in the outer bands of a hurricane in a 10-3 loss to NC State in 2016. And yet I thought I saw progress with Drew. I saw a guy that was confident, that ran the offense, did some things with his legs. It wasn't, a dominating performance by any, but I felt it was progress. So I'm wondering your take on that. First of all, your take on Drew Pyne's play, and then we can talk about what the next step is.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he played okay. I mean, the batted passes are probably the most, I guess, frustrating thing if you're watching as a fan, as an analyst, whatever. Watching as a coach, I think even Marcus Freeman didn't seem to be too pleased with that. I'm sure Tommy Reese isn't either. It just really messes up a play when you maybe have something already. Everyone else could have done something right, but if a pass gets batted down, that sort of ruins everything. And the biggest risk is that if it gets batted up, then that could end up turning into an interception, and you certainly don't want to do that. But I thought Drew's probably best help and attribute for Notre Dame this game was using his legs. It wasn't a lot, but he had some very important runs for Notre Dame's offense. Kept it for a touchdown when he doesn't keep it very often on the read option. Scrambled well when he needed to, and I think just sort of provided a little bit more balance, even if he wasn't providing it necessarily passing the football, but was able to give some more balance by him not having to be the only him handing it off, not being the only way that Notre Dame could gain some yards. And I think I liked what Marcus Freeman highlighted in terms of they did some different things in terms of they would huddle and then they would sort of get to the line quickly and not so they weren't necessarily doing the scan offense at times, and sort of getting up there quick. They would still run motion, but they weren't using a lot of time, and so they were sort of limiting what Clemson could sort of read and react to based off of how they were lining up. And I thought he operated that well. Notre Dame looked to be very fluid, and I think that reflects on the quarterback pretty well. So not a great game by him, a good enough game. I think the giving him player of the game is just a pat on the back, like, hey, we got your back. We don't need you to do a lot for you to be an important part of this offense. And obviously everyone's going to be singing the praises of the running game already. So I think that was a nod to Drew Pyne for sort of sticking with it and not getting discouraged and coming up when Notre Dame needed him to on Saturday against Clemson.
There are a couple of other elements I want to kind of explore in this particular headline, and Marcus Freeman did mention the batted passes. That's what he characterized the next step of Drew Pyne, being able to kind of step forward and get into those lanes and not get passes batted down. But what's really interesting to me, Tyler, is now they go against Navy. Now, I thought Clemson would be able to force the issue with Drew Pyne having to throw the ball a little bit more. And Notre Dame's running game was just so good that they never had to get there. Marcus even was surprised a bit that Notre Dame was able to, put up 263 rushing yards on the number 7 rush defense in the country. Now they play the new number 7 rush defense in the country in Navy. And what's really interesting is Navy's pass defense is awful. It's one of the 10 worst pass defenses in the country, number 122 out of 131 in pass efficiency defense. Even Air Force, who's the number 1 rushing team in the country, when they played Navy, they threw for 156 yards. That's how many holes and invitations there are to throw the ball against Navy, because they sell out against the run. And so if you're Marcus Freeman, what do you do in this game? Do you kind of push it incrementally a little bit? Do you kind of go flow the game? What do you do with Drew Pyne in this game with such an invitation to throw the ball?
Yeah, I think you sort of still have to lean on your strength. I don't know that Navy's defensive statistics are as much of a product of it having a good run defense as teams just being willing to go ahead and pass the football. And Notre Dame, I don't know that they can trust its ability to do that efficiently and effectively and not waste some of its offensive opportunities by coming out and trying to throw the ball over the place. That's not Notre Dame's strength. So I think Notre Dame will certainly mix in the pass, but I don't expect Notre Dame to sort of say, "Hey, Drew, this is up for grabs for our passing offense. So you go ahead and make some plays, and then we're confident that'll do that." I just think that would be too risky when Navy wants to shrink the game as much as it can and keep the ball from you as much as possible. That if you don't turn a couple of your early drives into points, then you could put yourself in a bad position for the rest of the game. So I would predict and advise, not that anyone's listening to me, to sort of lean on the running game, because if Notre Dame can run the ball against Clemson, who's selling out against the run, it can certainly do that against Navy, who's selling out against the run.
The last thing I wanted to mention on the Drew Pyne situation was the post-game hug on the sidelines that from Tommy Reese, who came down from the press box early and kind of bumped him, and then they hugged, and then Drew Pyne was all fired up, and I think congratulating everybody on the team. But Marcus was asked about that, and he, juxtaposed against the "do your bleeping job" conversation on the press box phone 6 games ago, and he described it as, "Hey, that's what happens in real, authentic relationships. You have, these extremes, and you have a lot of emotion, but it's real. And at the, he said sometimes the best way to love somebody is to give them discipline." I wondered what you thought about that explanation and sequence of events.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I've never had a problem with Tommy Reese coaching Drew Pyne hard. I think it has to be incredibly frustrating sometimes when he can go over everything ad nauseum and then it just not happen on game day. And that Drew Pyne is capable of making those throws or reading the right routes or just making the right decisions. So I just think Tommy Reese is a fiery guy. And I think Drew Pyne is aware of that. He understands it. I think Drew Pyne's a pretty fiery guy too. I don't think he probably expresses himself in that same way. And even as a player, Tommy Reese wasn't someone that was like demonstrative. He sort of just stood there and took it when he would get yelled at. So I think he probably expects his players to do that and knows when he can't do that. And so I think he deserved to be able to celebrate that moment with Drew Pyne. And it was nice to see that. I mean, I think we got a question somewhere that previously that said, "Wow, why is Tommy Reese always yelling at Drew Pyne?" I was like, well, they're not always showing you the moments where he's just coaching him calmly. And and obviously now they captured a good moment between Tommy Reese and Drew Pyne, because I obviously there's going to be some frustrations there when it's not going well. But I don't think the frustration has ever been from Drew Pyne's perspective. Tommy Reese isn't doing what he isn't trying to, doesn't have my best interest in mind. And I don't know that Drew Pyne or Tommy Reese would have ever said that Drew Pyne is like, he's intentionally not trying to succeed, or he's holding the back of the offense because he's not putting in enough time or effort. It's always been a matter of just going out there and doing it and sort of executing the game plan as they've gone over. So I think that they deserve that moment. It was interesting that they did get down on the field early. I noticed that. And that's the advantage of having such a big lead against Clemson. And it's probably good to be able to have that moment before the game ended, because it was probably a little bit harder to have that moment when the field got stormed by all the students. And maybe that played a role in Notre Dame's coaches deciding to get down there early because they didn't want to get prevented from getting down to the field with all the fans. So what did you think of that, Eric?
Of Marcus or this field storming?
Of Tommy Reese and Drew Pyne's sort of relationship.
I thought it was a cool moment, and I figured that probably, but it was nice to kind of see it. I figured that was probably part of who they are together. And I'm not sure that you can coach every quarterback like that either. I think that was sometimes Brian Kelly's hitch, was that he could scream at Tommy Reese and Tommy just kind of took it, or he gave it back to him, but didn't, ever go in the tank. Where I think there were some other quarterbacks that particular tack didn't work. But I thought it was an interesting moment, and I do think they're good for each other. I think Tommy Reese is going to get the best out of Drew Pyne. And I think Notre Dame fans are hoping we haven't seen the best of Drew Pyne yet.
Yeah, I think that's definitely probably true in both cases. All right, what is your second headline from today's press conference?
My second headline is Navy with its own QB drama and the cutting down of cut blocks. And so Navy, like Notre Dame, does not have its number one quarterback anymore. Ty Levitai suffered a season-ending knee injury in Navy's 27-20 victory over Temple, and that was October 29th. So they've played with their new quarterback setup most of the Temple game, and then in a 20-10 loss to Cincinnati this past weekend. And the starter is Xavier Arline. He's a lacrosse player too at Navy. He's a junior. He actually played some in Notre Dame's 34-6 victory last November in South Bend. And then the other guy's name is difficult to pronounce. He's a senior. And,
I don't have that one down like I have Uyunglele.
I will guess that it's Masai Maynor, and he's a senior. Those two throw the ball a little bit more than Levitai, so we may see Navy, get out of the triple option. And some of the reason that they're throwing the ball a little bit more now, they had 0 throwing yards in the Temple game as a team, but they're averaging about 100 yards a game, which is high for Navy. And part of the reason is the whole cut block change. Remember how there were even Notre Dame defensive linemen like Lewis Nix and Jerron Jones that kind of had mystery injuries that showed up that week. They didn't want to play against the triple option teams and kind of risk their future, because there were a lot of lower leg injuries. Notre Dame got them, other teams got them, and there were a lot of complaints about the cut blocks. Well, in this offseason, the NCAA Rules Committee changed the rules on cut blocks. So pretty much now it's limited to offensive linemen inside the tackle box. You can't be doing cut blocks, and that's, below the waist. You can't be doing those down the field, and, doing it to linebackers and defensive backs. And Navy really struggled with that out of the gate. At one point, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks into the season, they were the 50th ranked rushing offense in the country, and they're usually in the top 10, and they're back there now. I think they've adjusted some, but they're still not as potent without that. Tyler, what do you think about the change in the cut block rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to me. It puts sort of those second level and third level defenders in some danger when you got big linemen running down the field and diving at their knees or ankles. So um, I'm sure it's much more pleasant to play against the option as a linebacker or a safety now than it would have been last season. And so Notre Dame's defense will be able to appreciate that more. But obviously, you still have to focus in on the keys of who has the ball, who's in charge of which part of the triple option, and sort of staying disciplined and not sort of getting too anxious and wanting to make a play and knowing that, hey, even if the ball doesn't come to this guy, I have to make sure that if it does come to him, I'm in the right place. So the change in the cut blocks will still make it's not going to give those defensive linemen a break. So Notre Dame's defensive linemen will have to be ready for that. Fortunately, most of them have played against it previously, so they have that in their favor, but it's still something you have to be on guard for and ready to do, and isn't something that you can spend a lot of time doing live in practice because it still is dangerous. So you have to come up with different drills that sort of simulate that, whether it's pushing a medicine ball at your legs to sort of protect yourself or different things like that I'm sure Notre Dame's defensive staff will come up with to make sure that they're ready to go. And Marcus Freeman also mentioned that, like Brian Kelly in previous years, that they worked on defending the triple option in camp spent some time during the bye week on it because you need to be prepared for that. And it's hard to sort of do that just in 1 week. So it sounds like they're ready for it. And Al Golden has some experiences playing against the triple option as well. So I'll be interested to see how Notre Dame's defense fares against it on Saturday.
The big stud for Notre Dame last year against the option was Kurt Hinish. He had 10 tackles in the victory. And then J.D. Bertrand had 8. My guess, I always try to kind of figure out what Notre Dame's going to do. And sometimes they, guys that typically don't play a lot, like Kahanu Kia, got 4 tackles last year. He barely played against anybody else. He's on a Mormon mission now, but he was big against the triple option. I'm guessing either Mills or Cross will be a big factor in what's going on with the option this week.
I think those are probably good bets.
And before I go to the next headline, Tyler, can you tell our viewers how to ask a question? Their cues trickling in, but we would like a steadier stream.
Yeah, if you want to submit a question, if you're watching us on a desktop, the comment box should be to the right-hand side of the video. So go ahead and submit a question there. If you're watching on a tablet or a mobile device, I believe and you're in the YouTube app, I believe the comment box should be below. So go ahead and submit your questions there. We'll pick out some ones to get to. And you can be funny, you can be serious, whatever you want. Also, if you're like watching us embedded either on the Insider Lounge message board or on our InsideNDSports.com website, make sure you click through to YouTube itself. So you can watch on, click the headline that you see, or on the left-hand corner, there might be a button that says watch on YouTube. You need to get through there, because if you're asking us questions on the message board, we don't have that in front of us right now, so we won't be able to see that. So make sure you get those questions in, and we want to hear from you guys.
Okay. The next headline for me is sizing up Benjamin Morrison, and that's literal in this sense. Benjamin is a freshman cornerback who is the Walter Camp Player of the Week. He was also Marcus's Defensive Player of the Week, but I think the Walter Camp National Player of the Week trumps that. And he beat Drew Pyne and everybody else out for it. He had 2 interceptions, including a pick 6. He intercepted each of Clemson's quarterbacks that played in the game. He also had a pass breakup and 7 tackles, a career high 7 tackles. And sometimes when a cornerback gets 7 tackles, that's not a good thing, because that means people are completing passes down the field against him. That wasn't the case with Morrison. He did a really good job of helping shut down Clemson's perimeter game, both with some perimeter runs by Will Shipley, and then also Clemson was throwing a lot of quick passes out to their receivers and trying to get them to run in space. Patterson did a good job there. The funny part of it was Marcus was telling the story that number 84, which is Allen, their tight end, Davis Allen, is 6'6", 250 pounds. And he flattened Morrison. He was a speed bump the first time the two came in contact with each other. So Marcus's advice was to tell Mike Mickens, hey, look, we got weight classes. And Morrison is 179 pounds. Let's tackle him a little bit lower. But he was aggressive. He did a good job, but he almost got flattened by Davis Allen. So what do you think of Morrison's performance overall?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. You can't really ask for much more. It certainly had some ups and downs, but those ups were enormous. He had as many catches in a Notre Dame uniform as anyone other than Michael Mayer and Jaden Thomas on Saturday night with his 2 interceptions, because only 3 people caught passes for Notre Dame, and Chris Tyree also had 2 receptions. So he was all over the place, even not on the interceptions. He was in the right place, preventing big plays from happening, breaking up a pass, helping out in the run game. So just a really great game for him. He was getting all kinds of love on Twitter from former Notre Dame defensive backs, Julian Love, who was here in person, giving him a lot of praise, and that was certainly deserved. So we sort of saw flashes of what Benjamin Morrison can be from the very start of the season in the Ohio State game. And that's when everyone's like, oh man, Benjamin Morrison, this guy's really going to play this year. And it's been up and down, sort of what you would expect for a freshman cornerback, but you certainly can't expect a freshman cornerback to do the kind of things he did in the Clemson game. And that really went a long way in helping Notre Dame pull away in the second half and feel comfortable with where it was, because even though it sort of felt like Notre Dame was in control of the game, the scoreboard didn't necessarily reflect that until he was able to intercept that first pass and then obviously take the second one back for a touchdown.
Well, and it's been a great investment in him because they've lived with some growing pains with him as a starter. But when they face USC at the end of the month in Los Angeles, Notre Dame is going to need everybody that can cover people, because USC has such a prolific passing offense. So Benjamin Morrison, the Walter Camp Player of the Week.
You almost said year, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. What I think we're on headline number 4, if I'm right. What's your 4th headline, Eric?
We are, and it's the signaling spectacle surprised Freeman. And that was pretty funny. And I got to give Kyle Kelly credit. Now, I think everybody saw in the press box, saw what was going on with the defensive signals. They had this big, what would you call that was behind the signalers?
They had like 2 separate like green screens is what they were.
Yeah.
It was, but they had like Notre Dame signals on it, but they were just sort of like the backdrop of the players.
And so there were 3 guys. Was Eddie Scheidler one of them?
Eddie Scheidler was one of them. Zane Heemseth, who's a former walk-on defensive lineman, was another one. And then Timmy
Murray,
I believe that might be his name.
On the team?
He's a student manager.
Okay.
So he's a part of the team, but not a player.
Okay.
So not exactly people that we would be familiar with. I thought I recognized Eddie Scheidler, but the other 2 I didn't even know. And I was asking around Notre Dame and wasn't getting an answer right away. So I went to Twitter, and Eddie Scheidler was the one who actually spoke up and said, hey, that's me, and these are the other guys. So thankfully we were able to identify them, but they were wearing different colored shirts and signaling to the defense. Whether who was signaling what actually mattered, we don't have the answer to, but Marcus was sort of explaining how it was a bit of a gamesmanship in that as well.
Right. So they're very animated. They're all making these gyrations and motions. But what Kyle Kelly picked out that I don't think a lot of people did was after each defensive series, these guys were going to the medical tent and changing shirts with each other. That's how, and Marcus didn't know anything about the green screens. I think he was a little surprised at how in-depth this whole thing was. And yeah, he called it gamesmanship. And, they take defeating sign stealers seriously. And it's not indicative of Clemson. It's everybody. But I think they wanted to make a statement with the green screens against Clemson. So I thought that was pretty funny that Marcus had no idea that was going to be happening.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. I'm interested to see what Al Golden has to say about that on Tuesday. But yeah, that was an interesting wrinkle. Yeah, and I did not notice that they were going into the medical tent and changing shirts, but Kyle had his binoculars out and was spotting that and giving us updates on what was going on there. So that was pretty funny, and certainly had some use to it as well. Make sure that Notre Dame's defensive players were aware of what was going on and getting the signals clearly, and that communication is certainly important. And I'll be interested to see what they think of next, because they may have to just keep sort of raising the bar on that one.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, my next headline is about a couple of personnel matters, and we did separate stories on these. One is that Brandon Joseph, Notre Dame safety, starting safety, suffered a ankle sprain in the first half of the 35-14 victory over Clemson. He is described as questionable for Saturday's game against Navy. If they were still cut blocking, I could see them saying, okay, we just set this one out. If he's ready to go, it would seem like this is a bad week to miss even a day or two of practice, though, when you're going against the triple option. So I'm not sure how much. Have we taken a tally of the people that have been questionable that actually ended up playing in the game? I'm trying to get Marcus's patterns down.
I would say it's probably pretty low. I haven't necessarily counted or tracked it, but it seems to be usually guys that enter the week questionable don't end up playing, but I could be misremembering that. I think sort of it depends on what the situation is. And even if they play, they may not play as big of a role as they normally play. So I would think, especially given the way Xavier Watts played really well against the option last year. I think that was, in my opinion, maybe his breakout game as a safety last year, when you thought, okay, maybe this position switch is actually going to stick. And so having him back there, having DJ Brown, who's playing very well. Ramon Henderson didn't play against Navy last year, but we'll see what he can do. And then Houston Griffith obviously has been here a while, so he's not a stranger to the option offense. So I think they have some options there to go with if Brandon Joseph isn't healthy.
Yeah. So the other personnel matter was Joe Wilkins hit the transfer portal today, which surprises me. Not because I think just the timing surprises me. Because he's not going to gain an extra year by going in the portal today, like Jacob Lacey did. Jacob Lacey was able to take a redshirt year because he had only played in 4 games. I believe Joe Wilkins has played in more than 4 games. I know he has because he's been on special teams, I think 5 or 6 games. So he's past that threshold of being able to get that year back. So I'm not sure, he's going to have a year wherever he decides to go. It just seems, with the team playing well and everything he's been through in life and at Notre Dame, it just seems like stick it out, finish out the year with your teammates, and then go somewhere. So what's your thoughts on it? I mean, he wasn't catching any passes. Notre Dame's down to 6 healthy scholarship wide receivers. So what's your take, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't playing much. I think the most snaps he had played on offense was 7. He was playing some special teams. He was on the kick return team as recently as the Syracuse game. He didn't play at all against Clemson. So yeah, it's the timing is a bit strange. I would wonder if maybe he's trying to get a jump on the transfer recruiting process, that maybe getting into the transfer or expressing the want to transfer now and getting in the transfer portal can allow him to maybe go on some visits. He's already graduated from Notre Dame. So maybe whatever class obligations he already has, he can just sort of ignore and not worry about in terms of whatever he wants to do to transfer and being a graduate student somewhere else. So I don't have a lot of insight into what benefit he would have in terms of getting out of here earlier than seeing the season through. Maybe it's kind of surprising. Maybe like the next home game would be another senior day for him, and not going through that is a bit strange. Now maybe Notre Dame will let him. I don't really know how any of that's going to play out, but the timing is a little bit strange. But I don't know that it's going to affect Notre Dame's play in any way because he just wasn't able to make a big impact. Certainly had a season-ending knee injury last year, then worked his way back, and then suffered a foot injury in the spring and had surgery and was trying to get back healthy in time. And I'm not sure that that put him in the best position to impact the team this season. So sort of unfortunate timing for Joe Wilkins at the tail end of his Notre Dame career, and just sort of wish him the best and wherever he can land for one more season of college football.
I went back and double checked. He had played in 5 games, so he was one over the.
I think Notre Dame has him listed as playing 7. I think he played in 5 on offense.
On offense.
I think he played 7 if you include just special teams.
So no matter what, it's more than 4.
Correct. Yes, that is right.
Okay.
Now, my understanding, Eric, you have some bowl season, postseason knowledge you want to bless us with. I do not understand most of this stuff, and mostly because I've always worked with you, so I know that you're going to have it down pat. So I just to say, if anyone asks me a question, I say, well, I'll ask Eric because he knows how it's going. So I know you wrote about that on Sunday. So what do you want to tell us about where Notre Dame can end up at the end of the season?
So a lot of people were asking me on the message board and Twitter, can Notre Dame get to the New Year's Six bowl level? And they can. There's a pathway there. It's a pretty narrow pathway, but they can. And why it's narrower this year, and we won't have to deal with this once we get to the 12-team playoff, but they rotate the semifinal sites. And when it's the Peach Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl are not in the semifinals, there's really 4 at-large spaces. And one of those has to go to the group of 5. So there's 3 possibly that Notre Dame can get. Problem is this year, the Fiesta and the Peach are the semifinals. So their only shot is they could go to the Cotton Bowl and play the group of 5 team, which right now would be Tulane, or they could end up playing either North Carolina or Clemson in a rematch in the Orange Bowl, but they would have to get into the top 10 pretty well. They would have to beat out some runner-up SEC teams. They would be competing with teams like LSU and whoever the third best Big Ten team is, maybe Penn State, for that berth. And neither of those are super attractive. I actually think their best case scenario is the top of the tier 1 bowls for the ACC. And what those look like are the Holiday Bowl in San Diego. That's against a Pac-12 team. If that were today, they would play Utah. The Cheez-It Bowl in Orlando, that would be against a Big 12 team. And then the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. And for people saying, well, could LSU and Notre Dame possibly play each other? That would be the likely place. LSU would have to lose a game or 2 to end up in the Gator Bowl, though. And it, right now they control their own destiny. If they keep winning, they end up in the SEC championship game against Georgia. But they do have road games against Arkansas and Texas A&M. So we'll deal with that when we get a little bit later in the season. So that's really all you need to know about the bowls right now, that if you're rooting for a New Year's Six, it may not be the best opponent. I'm all for Notre Dame playing the best possible opponent. I think playing the group of 5 team is a lose-lose situation. If you beat them, everybody goes, well, they're a group of 5 team. And it's not like Cincinnati.
Yeah, but then they could finally stop saying that New Year's Six stat, right? I mean, that could finally go to bed.
But they would put an asterisk next to that. And then again, playing North Carolina and Clemson again, what do you have? I don't know that that's a win-win situation either.
No one wants to see that again. I mean, Clemson and North Carolina might want to seek out some revenge, but I don't know that Notre Dame or Notre Dame fans would want that. I know if I'm giving my preference, it would be number 1, a rematch, not a rematch, a Brian Kelly matchup against LSU. And then number 2, San Diego. Those are my preferences. I would if I have any say in the matter, those would be the things that I would prefer.
There's a possible matchup too in something called the ReliaQuest Bowl, which is a good bowl. It's in Tampa.
That's the old Outback Bowl, right?
Right. But it's contingent on other things happening in other bowls. So we'll leave that out of it, that they would play an SEC team there. But let's just figure that out when we get a little bit closer.
All right. Well, let's get into some questions. We have a mix of comments and questions that I wanted to throw out for us. But if you have some questions, please send them our way. We will start answering them now. The first one I want to share is just a comment that Notre Dame fans might be a little surprised by, from Nick Vella, who says, "Great win, USC fan. Very impressed with the last 2 weeks. Dominate. Good luck." So look at that, a USC fan telling Notre Dame fans, great win. So I just wanted to sort of share that for a moment there. Next one is from Roger Lancey.
Well, let me say something about that too, because
go ahead.
I think if USC wants to get into the playoff, they need a strong Notre Dame team and a strong UCLA team at the end of the year. They don't have a really difficult schedule. They don't have a lot of, they don't have any marquee wins really. So to beat UCLA and Notre Dame at their best would help USC at the end of the year. And the same with Notre Dame. I mean, they need, if they want to get higher in the rankings, they need USC to be good. They need them to be a one-loss team at the end of November. Okay, back to Roger Lancey.
All right, Roger Lancey. It was hard to see on TV, but there were several times where the check down to the back was wide open, but the QB never saw them or kept looking down the field too long. Did you see this in the press box?
I didn't notice that in this game. I've noticed it in other games, but I didn't notice it in this game. I noticed the batted down passes. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple instances that I remember seeing, but I mean, I think you have to be realistic sometimes, or it's like if that's like the fourth option he's looking at, then if he sees an option that he wants, then he's going to sort of try to get those other yards more. So, I mean, there wasn't anything egregious. I mean, there were a couple missed opportunities, I thought, but they weren't to running backs. There was one to Mitchell Evans down the field on a post that I thought that was like going towards the end zone, going into the red zone. I don't think they were in the red zone yet, but that maybe could have either scored or got Notre Dame close. And it's been interesting because Mitchell Evans hasn't contributed a lot in the passing game as a receiver, but he is playing a lot, primarily as a blocker when he's not operating the Mitchell-Palooza offense. But I don't. That is something that Drew Pyne needs to be aware of. But I didn't come away from the Clemson game specifically saying that was a particular issue for Notre Dame. All right, next one is from Bob Alvey. I underestimated how long it would take Marcus Freeman to know his personnel. His comments after UNLV told me he is coaching his assistant coaches harder. More simplification equals playing faster. Do you agree with that, Eric?
I think in Notre Dame's case this year, probably it is, just given their personnel. Looking at the defense, I mean, they had 3 coordinators in 3 years, a lot of different terminology, different schemes, although not drastically different, but enough that I think it was a challenge, especially for the linebackers. You can see lately they're getting it. I mean, J.D. Bertrand, he was kind of the message board, getting bullied guy. And now people are like, oops, I think he's pretty good. And he is really playing well. Maris Leofau is playing better. Prince Collie and Jack Kaiser are playing pretty well. So I think simplifying it on the defensive end was definitely the right thing. Offensively, I think for Drew Pyne, maybe simplifying it. I think for the offensive linemen, not simplifying it was the right move, and they didn't. Harry Heastand made them learn everything and made them learn it his way. And they struggled with that for a couple weeks, and now they've been pretty overpowering. I mean, that right now is a Joe Moore Award contender, the way that they're playing right now.
Yeah, and I think when we were asked in the preseason, people asked for what the expectations for the offensive line would be, and I kept saying, like, there's no reason that this offensive line shouldn't expect to be a Joe Moore Award contender. That's the potential they can reach. Now, obviously, we didn't see that from the start, but we're starting to see a little bit more of what that looks like. And so I don't know that that's related to simplification. Certainly, I wonder. I don't necessarily know what, like Maris Leofau, he played his best game against Clemson. Is he understanding what he needs to do better? Or are they asking him to do less or giving him simpler tasks to do that are putting him in a better position? I don't always have the best sense for that. And
I will
sometimes,
say this. I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I
sure.
mean, I've asked Al Golden about him a couple times, and I know he's tried to get Maris to think simpler, to think smaller, to
Hmm.
get into bite size. Don't worry about all the bells and whistles. Just worry about doing your job. But they did give those guys a lot in the preseason. They had to learn all three positions, or at least two positions, and what everybody else in the defense was doing. And he, I know with Maris's case, he did break it down, and it seems like it's paying off.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting contrast between Al Golden and Marcus Freeman, because when Marcus Freeman came to Notre Dame, everyone was like, you ask the players, what is it like trying to play in Marcus Freeman's offense? Like, play fast and free. Like that was like, you'd hear that from everyone, no matter who it was. And so it seemed like Marcus Freeman really leaned on that and wanted to bring out the best in his players by not overloading them with responsibilities. But Al Golden, coming from the NFL with a pretty big base from which he could choose and try to implement a defense, maybe went a little bit overboard. Hadn't been in the college game in a while, so maybe that took a while for Notre Dame to sort of figure out. But I think they've ended up in a good place, at least right now, and we'll see if they can keep it going through the rest of the season. All right, next one we have is from Jerry McClurg. Before the game, the line went like this: ND will not be able to run the ball, and Pyne can't make them pay throwing long. After the game, Clemson is a fraud, and ND exposed it. How about ND is good? What are your thoughts on those narratives surrounding the game, Eric?
Well, I think I said the first one. I thought that Clemson defense was good enough that they were going to be able to force the issue and put the game into Drew Pyne's hands. And the game wasn't Drew Pyne's hands. The thing about it was he didn't have to throw the ball but 18 times and only complete 9 because Notre Dame's running game was so good. And Drew Pyne ran enough to help that out. And he also mastered the changes in tempo that kept Clemson's defense off balance. Now, the second part, Clemson is a fraud and ND exposed it. I don't think that that's true. I think Clemson probably will win out. I don't know that they're the fourth best team in the country, but Notre Dame is good. I mean, they have the capability to be, a top 15 team at the end of the year, maybe even top 12 if they win out. So, but they had to grow into that team. They weren't that team against Stanford. I mean, the Stanford game to me will go down as one of the most befuddling things. Marshall, I could understand a little bit more, even though I don't know, maybe Marshall would beat Stanford. But Stanford is awful. And
It depends if you're playing in front of that raucous Stanford crowd.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, Marshall's offense, their running back is still, Laybourne is still one of the top running backs in the country. I know he's not facing Power 5 defenses every week, and their defense is ranked in the top 10 in almost every category. The rest of their offense has gone to pot. They can't score. They turn the ball over. Their offensive line gives up sacks. They've changed quarterbacks, but their defense is pretty solid. But I think Notre Dame is showing what they can be at this point. And I think, my expectation is they're going to go into the USC game 8-3 with a chance to see what their ceiling really is. So I guess I'm agreeing with one, disagreeing with two, and saying number 3 is probably right.
Yeah, to me, I think the ACC is fraudulent. I don't know that Clemson is fraudulent. I just think that the way that Notre Dame has beaten the two best teams of the ACC, even when this isn't one of Notre Dame's better teams, sort of speaks to the quality of that conference. And so that's who took the biggest L this week, in my opinion. Certainly, Clemson has some things it needs to address, and Dabo was pretty pretty blunt after the game, saying Notre Dame kicked their butts, and he expected a lot better. Didn't expect that outcome, but I don't know. Certain people, I mean, I can understand why people saying being disappointed, and I think sometimes people feel betrayed. It's like, well, I was really sticking up for Clemson, and then they went and fell on their face against Notre Dame. So now I'm going to say Clemson's a fraud, which I don't know that that's the case. They're a fraud maybe in terms of being a playoff team, but they're still a really good team. All right, next question is from Scott Fegan. Guys, do you see Tommy try to open up the air game over the next 2 weeks, and he should have a big athletic advantage?
I think it's going to be incremental. That's what I said in my notebook / column today. I don't think that it's going to go from 9 completions to 25 completions in a week, even with as bad as Navy's pass defense is. I think Tommy's just going to ease the throttle a little bit this week to throwing, because there's going to be mismatches in Notre Dame's passing game. Against Boston College, not as much. I think they're going to want to run the ball in that game and mix it up. And then against USC, I mean, there's going to be opportunities there. Jack Plummer threw all over USC's defense this past weekend. Cal was down 20 and almost came back and won that game. I think it was 41-35. And really, USC isn't very good against the run either. So there's going to be opportunities. But I just don't think opening up is something that we're going to be using as our descriptor in what the Notre Dame offense looks like the rest of this regular season.
Yeah, I think we're sort of past the point of return. Like, the offense is what the offense is at this point. I don't think we're going to see major strides in the passing game at this point. So I don't know that like making it a point to try to improve the passing game for the long term will be a very high priority for Notre Dame. Now,
I think it will in 2023 be a priority, but not
well, sure, right. But right now they got to go out and win the games, and they can't afford to. I mean, what can you can't afford? But they should not lose these next 2 games, and that would really take a lot of the goodwill that they've earned by beating Clemson away if they fall on their face against Navy and Boston College, at least in my opinion. Now, maybe people feel differently. They're just like, well, we at least had.
I don't feel differently. I think you've got to not only win those games, but show improvement.
Right. And so, but I don't know that you don't have to do that in every aspect. So if you can win the games without opening up the offense in terms of having it being a high-flying passing offense, then don't do that. But there will be more shots down the field. I don't think we're going to see Drew Pyne completing 9 passes probably again this season. I would imagine he completes more than 9 in the rest of their games the rest of the way. But I do think that the run game will be the heavy priority, and I don't see a lot of teams left on the schedule that will be able to stop Notre Dame from having success doing that.
And Scott, if you're wondering, well, how does this play with recruits? I think what Marcus Freeman and Tommy Reese are telling the recruits is, hey, look, when we get our 2023 guys in here, you're going to see a different offense. This is the way we have to play this year. This is our stepping stone to that more dynamic offense. And I think that's the recruiting pitch.
All right. We got a few more questions here. Let's try to get through them quickly. Next one is from Rick Jenkins. Do you see Steve Angeli getting some playing time in the next 2 weeks?
I do. I think there will be opportunities if Notre Dame is able to be up by 3 touchdowns. You know, who thought that maybe they should put him in at the end of the Clemson game? But I do think that there's going to be opportunities against both Navy and Boston College. Right now, Phil Jerkovic was hurt. He did not play in their last game.
Yeah, there should be opportunities, but there should have been earlier in the season too.
Yeah, there should have been.
You can't take that for granted, but yeah, I think that would be a good opportunity potentially in these next 2 games for Steve Angeli to get out there in a blowout victory and get some more reps under his belt. All right, next one's from Ed Coquillard do you know about why Will Fuller has basically disappeared? He had a decent career and all the teams needing receivers. What's keeping him from getting signed?
I'm going to let you handle that, Tyler, because I don't follow the NFL like you do. I know he's had a lot of injuries during his NFL career, but I have not followed him lately.
Yeah, I don't have any information necessarily that's new.
Oh, good. We have a question we can't answer.
uh, but the one thing I did want to address, I did see there was something going around Twitter that he had retired. I think he showed up on some sort of transactions list as having retired, and then there was something that came out after that refuting that he had retired. So I'm not sure that he has retired. So, but he hasn't been able to get on a team. I don't know if someone will pick him up down the rest of the year, but the injuries, you're right. He was suspended at one point for violating the NFL's performance enhancing substances list. So he hasn't had the best luck as an NFL receiver. So I don't know what the future looks like for him. And then lastly, from the Golden Playbook, who's more talented, Drew Pyne or Tyler Buckner?
Tyler Buckner, hands down.
Yeah.
It's not even close, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree as well, and that's why he was named the starting quarterback. It's kind of funny how you see everyone. I mean, after Drew Pyne has a couple of games, like, man, should they have really named Drew Pyne the starter? And then 2 games after that, it's like, oh well, this isn't as going.
Bring on Steve Angeli.
right. So everyone's quick to judgment, especially when they wanted something. I think that, like, when you wanted to see Drew Pyne, and then he gets out there and then plays well, it's like, see, I told you all along, I was right. Drew Pyne should have been the starter. And then I think we've seen as the season has played out that Tommy Reese and Marcus Freeman made the right decision in naming Tyler Buckner the starter, even though he did lose the 2 games he started the season, but I wouldn't put those losses all on him. All right, that wraps up our questions, Eric.
All right. Well, we are limited a little bit on how much we're going to do the bottom line. I think we've discussed a lot of it already, but let's talk about a few of the key things. The rushing disparity, 263 to 90. I mean, both those numbers are impressive. Al Golden's rush defense, they were down around 72, which was Brian Van Gorder-ish. They're up to 35th in the country in rush defense. They held Clemson overall to under 300 yards, and Notre Dame is 27th in total defense. Even though Drew Pyne only threw for 85 yards, he actually had a better pass efficiency rating than DJ Uiagalelei, who threw for 191 with a touchdown, got sacked 4 times, got intercepted, was 27 to 39, a lot of short passes. Cade Klubnik, the freshman, 5-star freshman that came in for the 5-star junior, threw an interception in his only pass attempt, and they went back to DJ. So a lot of impressive things about how the lines of scrimmage were dominated by Notre Dame. A couple other stats that grabbed me on offense: Logan Diggs, 114 yards on 17 carries. Audric Estime, 104 on 18 carries, and he has a touchdown. He has 9 rushing touchdowns this season. Before I pick out a couple defensive guys, Tyler, I want to run this by, Audric is a freak, and he is amazing in his ability to just run over people. Logan Diggs, though, has really impressed me as well, because I think his vision is excellent. You watch him, and sometimes there's not a hole, and he knows when to bounce it outside. He knows when to make his cuts. I've just been really impressed with him over the past few weeks. What's your thoughts on Logan?
Yeah, I think he when I was watching some of the running game stuff back, I was like, man, it's got to be a lot of fun to block for Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. Those guys are running hard. They're using the blocks well. They're seeing what is happening in front of them. They're trusting what is happening in front of them. They're not the same player. I think Logan has the ability to bounce outside a little bit more, is a little bit more elusive. But he's made pretty significant strides, in my opinion, in terms of how hard he runs, the leverage that he runs with. And Audric Estime, yeah, I think I remember during the game you sort of expressed when we were sitting up in the press box, like some of the vision that you were seeing from Logan Diggs while we were watching, and then going back and watching the game and seeing some of the plays from behind the offensive line when you get to like the end zone camera or whatever. The way that Audric Estime was cutting, and they're more subtle because it's happening in smaller spaces, but the way he was sort of reading the blocks and sort of getting through the hole just in time was really impressive. So both of those guys, hats off to them. The offensive line played really well, but those guys helped out the offensive line a tremendous amount as well. So it was a very cohesive running game that led to Notre Dame's offensive output there.
On defense, J.D. Bertrand, again, continues to be impressive. 12 tackles, 2 of them for losses. One of those was a sack. We already mentioned Benjamin Morrison. Isaiah Foskey had a sack among his 4 tackles, and he's now a half a sack away from tying Justin Tucker, 1 sack from passing him for the all-time career leader at Notre Dame. You know, the thing about it was with Notre Dame's pressures, they were able to get home. That Tariq Bracy corner blitz was really impressive. It seemed like everything that didn't work in terms of pressures early in the season worked against Clemson.
Yeah, and there was another play that Tariq blitzed on too that influenced a pressure. It might have been the one J.D. Bertrand had the sack on. He sort of blitzed from the outside as well, and sort of so DJ sort of ran the other way and helped create another sack.
One thing that we haven't talked a lot about that I think was important, this whole lineup shuffle on the defensive line, I think, has been really good for the run fits. Moving Justin Adamalola over to the other end spot and then elevating Jordan Botello to the backup Viper end, and then playing Riley Mills a lot inside, I think has made them a better run defense. I think that's been really good. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's helped probably in both aspects too, because when you have Justin Adamalola and Isaiah Foskey on the field at the same time, you got a decent pass rush coming off the edge there too. So I think Justin Adamalola is probably maybe the unsung hero of the defense. Maybe, I mean, you could probably say that for JD Bertrand just because of the way that so many people in the fan base treat JD Bertrand for what he does or doesn't do. But Justin Adamalola, he's the reason, a big part of the reason Cade Klubnik threw that interception. He was in his face, and he had to throw that off balance, which was a poor throw. And I wanted to sort of highlight that Cade Klubnik moment because we talked. I mean, people always wanted, like, why aren't they putting Steve Angeli in these situations where maybe the team could get back, because the defense didn't allow them to have a big enough lead that it was maybe only a 2-score game and Drew Pyne was just going to hand it off the rest of the way. But what happens if Steve Angeli goes in there and messes up? I don't know how much heat Dabo was catching from Clemson fans for the decision to put Cade Klubnik in at that moment. Certainly the offense wasn't killing it with DJ, but I didn't think it was necessarily all of his fault. But the position that they put him in when he's backed up near his own end zone, it was just, I thought it was a very bad decision, and it played out that way. So Dabo certainly has more. I mean, he's got a pretty big resume. So when people second guess him, they're probably not as angry about it as they would be of a Marcus Freeman or Tommy Reese decision. But I thought that was a kind of a baffling decision and sort of blew up in their face and was really, I mean, Notre Dame was playing well and sort of controlling the game, but that was sort of the tilt moment where it's like, okay, this game's getting out of Clemson's control, and I don't know that they can get their way back in it after that interception.
Well, what would you do if you were Dabo for the next game? Who would you start at quarterback? Would you stay with DJ?
I would probably stay with DJ, or I mean, if you're going to play Klubnik, play him. Let him start. But I think the issues with the offense are far greater than just the quarterback. You don't see difference makers at wide receivers, which is a shocker at Clemson. Clemson has never had that issue. I don't know how much better Clemson's wide receivers are than Notre Dame's. Now, maybe that's probably being exaggerating things a little bit, but Clemson just doesn't have the guys on the outside that they normally do. And so I think that they have their own issues beyond just that, the quarterback position there. So I mean, I don't watch Clemson on a regular basis where I would see all of the lows and the moments that DJ
We'll DM Eric McLean
isn't sort of executing what they're asking him to do. But I think probably the back and forth isn't necessarily helping anybody. And the other thing I wanted to highlight, we haven't said much about the punt block. It can't be overstated how much that impacted the game. For Notre Dame to be able to play with a lead, give the defense some confidence to not be playing in a tie game early, the offense to be able to sort of get into its run the ball mindset and not have to worry about trying to catch up with Clemson. I mean, that was just huge. I mean, Brian Mason, pay him as much as he wants. He's delivering in big ways on a weekly basis for Notre Dame. And kudos to the guys on that punt block team that they're doing what they're asked of. They take it seriously. I think it's probably a little bit easier to do that when you see the impacts that you can make in the punt block unit when they're having success like that. But every team knows that they're coming, and they're not. It's like if you just watch the Jordan Botelho one, he comes right up the middle. It's no. Now maybe there's a lot of study that goes into that leads into the moment of, okay, this is what we're going to do in this position, and the way other guys are lined up, maybe put Clemson in a tough position to try to block everyone. But it's pretty simple. He's the guy that's the closest to the long snapper. He went straight through at the punter, and they just don't block him. It's like Brian Mason may be a great special teams coach, but whoever's coaching that punt team is like, what are you doing, coach? Like that wasn't exactly the most creative punt block scheme that I've ever seen. So props to Notre Dame special teams coordinator Brian Mason and those special teams players for committing themselves and really impacting games the last 4 or 5 of them right now.
So do we want to look at the wrap up with a kind of a quick look at Navy?
Yeah. Let's do a quick look at Navy. I think we've covered most everything. I think so. Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap things up with a quick look at Navy.
Okay, I want to just say before I do that, I see your comment, Ed Coke-Willard, and we appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for submitting a question.
Okay, so when you look at Navy, it's kind of like what you expect, that they're in the top 10 in rushing offense, and they're in the bottom 2 or 3 in passing offense, and they're not very good in pass efficiency. Where Navy has to make its money is being a good third down team and being a team that doesn't turn the ball over. And they're kind of middling in both. That hurts them. They're a good special teams team, right. Especially in their coverage units. And then on defense, I mentioned earlier, 7th in the country in run defense. They give up maybe 3.1, 3.2 per carry, and then they're 122 in pass efficiency defense, which is awful. They're kind of in the middle in total and scoring defense. They'll try to limit possessions. Again, for Notre Dame, you just have to be really good with the football. You don't want to turn it over to them and let them sit on the ball and limit your possessions. You don't want them to play with the lead. So the important thing is, if you win the toss, take the ball and get that 7-0 lead on Navy, and then put them in a position to have to play catch up the rest of the game.
Or you could defer and block Navy's first punt for a touchdown.
That's true. One of those 2 scenarios.
Yeah, and we will be back on Friday with our place your best predictions for that Navy game. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in live or watching this on replay. Please subscribe to receive reminders for future live shows, and throw us a like, as I mentioned earlier, and tell us what your favorite moment of the Clemson game was in the comment section. Next on our agenda will be the Inside ND Sports podcast on Tuesday. And there's always written content for you on InsideNDSports.com and plenty of discussion on the Insider Lounge. Have a good night.